The next big public protest against government austerity measures came just weeks before the riots. The J30 march was a large but peaceful march against pension cuts, featuring one union which had never taken strike action in its century-long history.
We've been in an organisation in various guises for 127 years. We have never taken national strike action. In 1979 we balloted for national action, but never a day such as this.
Meanwhile, across the pond in the United States, an idea was just beginning to form, and people were starting to cluster around it. By October, Occupy London had been formed and descended on the capital's financial district. The same climate of public opinion that birthed the Occupy movement also led to the riots being considered as more than just mindless violence. A national conversation began to take hold about capitalism and the current political and financial systems. There was a real sense of urgency about the debate. For 3 or 4 months towards the end of 2011 and the start of 2012, there was a feeling that we in Britain might be on the cusp of great changes, and Occupy was at the centre of this. At the time, there was optimism.
This is about creating a hub where people can come and start debating, discussing ideas about our society and where we want to take it. It's about understanding our society. It's about building a movement to challenge, the current powers in our society as well.
It was pretty tricky in the beginning to organize such a movement like this, but I think we did pretty well. As you can see around, we have a pretty good organization here. Of course, it's a work in progress, but I think things are going pretty well.
I've come down because I believe that the system that's currently in place is completely unsustainable, and it's putting huge pressure on the environment in extracting so many resources from this planet. We live on a finite planet. It can't go on forever, and we can't have continuous growth.
One of the messages which I think they have got across is we need to have a proper dialogue, a national dialogue about what we want from our economy, what we want from our society, what is just, what is not just, what respects people, what respects our environment. And I think they've done that because they've created this space within which a dialogue can happen.
People are asking their MPs what they're doing about the banking crisis. People are actually going onto the National Audit Office website, pulling off some of the reports and reading it. I have friends who have no interest in economics whatsoever, discussing the banking reforms. I think that's brilliant. Only good can come of it.
Occupy London could not have lasted forever, though. Movements based upon sit-ins and occupations always have a limited shelf life. After a few months, its own principles began to eat away at it. Occupy London never spoke with just one voice. Its lack of focus became a key weakness.
There are anarchist groups, right-wing anarchist groups, who think the government is too big, that we should not have bailed out the banks, we should have let them fail. That's something I can sympathise with. And that runs all the way through to left-wing anarchist groups who are paradoxically in favour of huge expansion of the government, expansion of the welfare state. So if you do go down there, you're not going to be short of opinions.
Support and attention ebbed away from the movement as their message stagnated and progress ground to a halt. As the months wore on, the Occupy camps in London were gradually dismantled and moved on. Occupy initially drew different voices together, but unable to coexist, they've now splintered apart. Occupy's overarching goals of a fairer economic system, with greater equality and more opportunities for those stuck in poverty, resonated with what many rioters said caused the riots. One Guardian newspaper poll saw 86% of rioters cite poverty as a key cause, ranking it higher than any other issue. It is economics that connects all of the major protests in the UK for the past several years. And yet, the government has taken relatively little notice when it comes to policy. What they have been seriously considering, though, is allowing the police to toughen up. In the wake of the riots, the furious majority of the public was calling for the police to be less passive and to take a harder line with rioters. They wanted swift, brutal justice. The government shared this sentiment, and the Home Secretary Theresa May commissioned a report to look at policing tactics.
We are now taking
When the report was published at the end of 2011, it advocated the use of water cannons, rubber bullets, and even live firearms should the police feel a certain public order situation warranted it. This directly contradicted a report made by a parliamentary committee just weeks before, which stated that it could not recommend the use of such measures, and that they likely would have caused the riots to escalate had they been deployed.
Plastic bullets kill. They have killed 17 people in Northern Ireland. They are particularly dangerous when they're used against young people. A large number of the people who were on the streets during the August disturbances, they were young people. And if plastic bullets had been used in that situation, again, there is the potential that young people would have been seriously injured or even killed by those weapons. And that could not have helped the situation in any way.
I don't think on a practical level anyway, it's going to achieve what they want to achieve, because I think if you fire water cannons at people, what that means is they disperse. Now, they think that they're going to disperse and therefore they won't do anything. It means that they can go off in all different directions, and if the police were planning to arrest individuals, they wouldn't be able to do that because they'd get away anyway, wouldn't they? So I don't think it achieves their objectives anyway in having that.
There are substantial numbers of police officers who are trained in public order policing, who are trained to deal with people throwing missiles, people committing criminal damage by fire, even people attacking police officers by fire, and none of that training requires anything like rubber bullets or water cannons.
The motivation for putting these tools at the police's disposal may well be that their reputation will go before them, and people won't dare to riot again for fear of encountering them. But then again, water cannons and plastic bullets didn't stop protesters in Cairo from driving President Mubarak out of office. The Home Secretary is still considering whether or not to change the police's rules of engagement to allow the easy use of these weapons against crowds. Meanwhile, in riot-hit communities, people have simply had to pick themselves up and carry on. Even before the 2011 unrest, Tottenham was famous for the Broadwater farm riots of 1985. Some still remember the difficult recovery from that violence. And yet, the mood of Tottenham's residents 1 year on from the latest trouble is surprisingly optimistic.
The rebuilding's doing very, very well. I think as a community we've bonded more. We're now thinking of our children more, our community, and how we can best help the community.
It's one of those things where it was an awful thing and it was an awful time, but I think people have just come together as a group or a community, if you like, and just pick themselves up and they've just carried on with things.
The community's together, they're working together, they're building things, we've got a lot of things happening, there's a bond, there's a new spirit of unity in the community. And I think obviously the government needs to work closer with the community leaders, to understand what's happening, because I think